Are you emotionally blind? Maybe you're autistic and people have commented that you don't respond appropriately to other people's emotions. Or maybe it takes you time to process your own emotions. Well, you might just have alexithymia. Hi, I'm Phil, a late diagnosed autistic older adult. And this time I want to take a look at how autistic people process feelings and emotions and how that relates to alexithymia. First up, we have probably all heard the myth about autistic people being emotionless like robots or having no empathy. So where do these ideas come from? Is there any truth to it? And more importantly, what are the facts around how autistic people process their feelings and emotions? And how does that affect how we respond to other people? So what actually is alexithymia? Sometimes also called emotional blindness, alexithymia is a difficulty identifying, understanding, expressing and describing emotions in ourselves. It can be influenced by several factors including genetics, past experiences and some medical conditions, and is experienced by 4 to 13% of the general population, but by 50 to 80% of the autistic population. Basically, it is a difference in emotional processing. The term was first used by Professor of Psychiatry Peter Emmanuel Sifnios in 1972 and comes from the Greek a for lack, lexis for word, and thymos for emotion, or quite literally a lack of words for emotions. As a person with alexithymia has difficulty processing their own emotions, this may also affect how they process the emotions of other people. Alexithymia can be present in people with autism, depression, PTSD, eating disorders, anxiety and acquired brain injury. Some key traits of alexithymia are as follows, and a note here is that not all people with alexithymia will experience all these traits. Difficulty distinguishing feelings from bodily sensations. This understanding of what's going on inside our bodies is the body's interoceptive sense and deals with things like hunger, thirst, pain, etc. But also includes emotional arousal, which incorporates things like anger, fear, excitement or love. So someone with alexithymia might get these sensations mixed up. Another trait of alexithymia can be a difficulty describing feelings. Or how about this one? A difficulty identifying facial expressions. Going a step further, this can include a difficulty remembering faces. This, in its more extreme form, is called prosopagnosia or face blindness. Also, a difficulty fantasizing. This can be linked to aphantasia or the inability to visualize mental images. This is sometimes called mind blindness. It can also be that it takes longer to process emotions compared to other people. Alexithymia can be broken down into two main types. Cognitive alexithymia, which is the difficulty identifying, verbalizing and analysing emotions, and affective alexithymia, which affects imagination and emotional arousal. So what are the causes of alexithymia? Firstly, primary alexithymia is either present from birth or develops in childhood due to trauma. This trauma can be due to negative interactions in childhood with primary caregivers. Primary alexithymia is a lifelong condition. Secondary alexithymia is caused as a result of psychological stress, chronic disease, or damage to the brain caused after childhood. When caused by stroke or damage to the brain after childhood, secondary alexithymia is also called organic alexithymia. So how can alexithymia affect empathy? When people observe feelings and emotions in others, the natural response is to judge those feelings or emotions based on our own understanding and experiences. When we have difficulty in understanding our own feelings and emotions, it may make it difficult to understand or empathise with another person. This is our cognitive empathy that is affected here, which affects our ability to understand another person's perspective or mental state. But emotional or affective empathy can also be affected, which impacts our ability to respond with an appropriate emotion to another person's mental state. So how we respond to another person might not be as expected. Alexithymia can have an impact on relationships as the person struggles to express their own feelings and emotions, and this may cause barriers to creating emotional bonds with other people, particularly as the person with alexithymia may avoid focusing on their own internal state. So are autistic people in fact emotionless robots, as the stereotype would suggest? Well, firstly, if an autistic person is less able to process empathy compared to other people, then it is probably more a result of alexithymia rather than autism. If cognitive empathy is more affected, then a lot of our feelings and emotions can go undetected. But even so, they are indeed still present and can have an effect on mood and behaviour, reducing our overall well-being. But research has also shown that despite the result of people in the general population with alexithymia experiencing decline in both cognitive and affective empathy, autistic people tend to have a much higher affective empathy than neurotypical people. This has been labelled by some as empathetic over-arousal. It is in fact the cognitive side of the empathy that tends to be lower in autistic people. So in an autistic person, what this can look like is being overly empathetic in mirroring or feeling other people's emotions, while being unable to easily pinpoint what we are feeling ourselves, even when those feelings are intense. Maybe another way of expressing this is that empathy is an automatic response, whereas sympathy involves understanding the cognitive side of feelings, which may be difficult for someone with alexithymia. Sometimes this difference in how an autistic person with alexithymia experiences empathy can be confused with psychopathy. Whereas an autistic person is more likely to have diminished cognitive empathy and possibly even heightened affective empathy, a psychopath is more likely to have an intact cognitive empathy and a reduced affective empathy. This difference can cause a person with psychopathy to have a lack of empathy and remorse due to this diminished affective empathy. But with intact or even enhanced cognitive empathy, this combination can lead to behaviours such as manipulation, which is very different to autism. Now, this is by no means a complete description of psychopathy, but the message here is please don't conflate these two conditions. Autistic people often have difficulties in identifying facial expressions. But guess what? This is actually due to alexithymia rather than autism. So we can start to see just one small reason why autistic people are all different from each other. In this case, an autist with alexithymia might struggle with face perception, but an autist without alexithymia might be quite good at face perception. So how about you? Do you struggle correctly identifying facial expressions? If you want to explore this one further, I will leave a link in the description to the Embrace Autism Reading in the Mind's Eyes test. Have a go and see how you do. As a reference, I scored 26 correctly, which is in the higher range of correct answers compared to other autistic people, but lower than compared to the neurotypical average. Feel free to put your results in the comments section. Be interesting to have a chat. The other side to this facial expressions dilemma is that someone with alexithymia may show a lack of emotional expressions on their face. This is often identified in autistic people and is sometimes called a flat affect. But be aware that despite this apparent lack of expression, there may be deep emotions happening inside. So do I experience alexithymia? Actually, I was not really sure whether I experienced alexithymia, and if so, to what degree. So to answer this question, I did an online test to see where I fall. I was actually quite surprised to find that I scored very high on the alexithymia scale. So let's break it down a bit further and see what my alexithymia actually looks like as an autistic adult. I am definitely an empath. This comes out strongly in how I respond physically to others' emotions. But I have often struggled to express my feelings. This was always a problem in my earlier adult years when trying to negotiate dating and relationships. I was always unable to express my feelings in appropriate ways to partners, leaving them feeling uncertain about whether I was serious about the relationship. This, I believe, contributed to the failure of relationships through this period. The other thing that occurred due to this inability to understand or appropriately express feelings was, in some circumstances, an overcompensation in knowing that people were supposed to express feelings and trying to mimic what I believed others would do. This just came across as extremely awkward and either sincere or over the top, also leading to negative relationship outcomes. The overall results from these interactions was probably to add a layer of secondary alexithymia to my underlying primary alexithymia, with the result of even less understanding of how to express feelings or emotions. So what are some of the other ways that I express alexithymia? Similar to many other autistic people, my affective empathy is very high. This can look like getting emotional watching TVs or movies and reacting to the emotions or situations of the characters. But can also be out of context, like getting emotional during an advert where no one else would have any sort of reaction. Even in conversation, I often find myself getting emotional, but again, this might be out of context to the topic, but internally there might be a response to a conversation topic or trigger. I was also quite surprised to learn that face memory and recognition is also affected by alexithymia, as this has always been a really big one for me. Long before I had any understanding about my autism, I realised I had significant face blindness. I cannot even picture the faces of people in my life who are the closest to me, even though in my mind I have a deep sense of who these people are and their individual uniqueness. If I see someone on the street that I know, I will usually wait for them to acknowledge me first, as my confidence that I've identified even a person I know well is very low. In fact, on occasions I've said hello to people thinking it was someone I know, only to then discover that it was not that person after all. Very embarrassing. I can also get quite confused watching TV if characters look similar or even have a similar haircut. Also, I was surprised to learn that the inability to fantasize was a trait related to alexithymia. This has also been something that I've identified in myself and only recently discovered the concept of aphantasia, or the inability to create or hold mental imagery. I hope to come back to this topic in a separate podcast in the near future, as it is both fascinating and relevant to many autistic people. But despite all of these traits, I would not consider myself to be severely affected, in that I do think that I have some ability to be able to interact with other people at an emotional level. Maybe just not very well. So how is it best to help or respond to someone in your life who has alexithymia? I think the main thing here is to be patient with them when they might not respond in an expected or indeed appropriate way. It might be that the autistic alexithymic person is confused and may be waiting for further cues to try and work out how to respond. It may be that talking about emotions in an objective way outside of an emotional situation might help better understand how the autistic person thinks. Also be aware that the autistic alexithymic person may not display in their facial expression either what emotion is being experienced or the depth of that emotion. Just an extra point here that I wanted to add in. Sometimes you might notice that the alexithymic person might be on edge or irritable or even going at a faster pace than normal. This might mean that there is something going on the inside that they don't even realise themselves, but their bodies are showing the signs externally. This could be a time to check in with them just to see if they're okay. So in summing up, here are some key points to remember. Autistic people may feel emotion deeply, but because of alexithymia may struggle to identify or process those emotions. This disconnect between the brain and the body might also mean we confuse feelings from these emotions with other internal bodily sensations. Alexithymia may be present from birth or develop over a lifetime due to environmental factors, trauma, brain injury or illness. And it may have surprising outcomes like making it hard to recognise faces or even how we imagine or fantasise. And all these factors may affect how we build and maintain relationships. So autistic people are not in fact emotionless robots, but as we may process things like emotions differently, we may just respond a bit differently to everybody else. So do you think you might have alexithymia? To help answer this question, I have left a link to the Embrace Autism website Alexithymia self-test in the video description. So why not jump on over there and have a go, and pop your results and other experiences of alexithymia in the comments. So that's it for now. Please like, subscribe and share for more lived autistic experiences. Take care and be kind to yourself. See you next time.